So I'm delighted today to introduce Dr. Alana Westwood and Revant Sharon. Alana is the principal investigator and core team chair of the Ecological Forestry Research Initiative, as well as an associate professor at the School for Resource and Environmental Studies at Dalhousie. She approaches her research and teaching from a what works lens and unrelatedly has over 60 houseplants. Revant is the research coordinator for EFRI and a brilliant facilitator and manager of the enterprise. He has experience in sustainable energy and is passionate about making a real world impact in the field of environmental and resource management. And unrelatedly has a tree tattoo. So with that, I welcome you and turn it over to Alana and Revant.
Thanks so much for having us. Really excited to share this with you today. Hopefully everything's working okay now with the browser window and the screen sharing. I can't see anybody, so please just cut in Heather or anyone else if there's any issues. There will be some audience participation today, so please open your chat and get your chatting fingers ready. If you could just write in like where you're joining from. And Rayvant, would you mind reading me out some of the answers? Where are folks joining from?
We have one from AFC Corner Brook, and then Aaron Fraser is from Edmonton, Alberta.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got some broad representation.
Yeah.
Maybe someone from BC chimes in, or up north, we'll have the full coastal range. So myself and Rayvant today are going to share with you the Ecological Forestry Research Initiative. Some of you may have heard of it. Most of you probably haven't. But also the process by which we got there and created this thing. So throughout today's presentation, we're going to talk about kind of the seeds that led to EFRI. We're going to talk about this period of critical growth related to research and knowledge exchange, and then Rayvant's going to introduce you to EFRI. How many tree and forest puns will there be? We'll see. One thing I will say is EFRI is really it's a big canopy initiative. We try to branch out far and wide, and that's why I'm really pleased to be here. So thanks for inviting us, Heather. And we'd love to work with folks who want to work with us. So as we're going to touch on a whole bunch of different topics related to forest management, forestry. If you see yourself in any of those topics, if you're interested in getting involved, if you want to share your research and have our people know what you're up to, or broker conversations, we would really welcome that. So please do think about how your work may or may not intersect with what we're doing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about kind of my journey and how I got here as the core team chair of EFRI and the principal investigator who kind of founded the thing. I started my career in forestry and forest research as a sullen teenager, honestly. I was a field assistant. I was working in aspen regeneration in Aspen Parkland in Manitoba. I would love to hear in the chat, has anyone researched in Aspen Parkland? Rayvant, let me know if anyone has. How was it?
Okay, so Jessica Walker has raised their hand, but I don't think they can talk.
Please let me know in the chat and I will read it after, because it was rough. We were doing regeneration surveys. There were hundreds of stems in 5-meter plots. It was tick and mosquito infested. We would do daily tick counts and compete to see who got the most. And I totally fell in love with the work. I then did my honors thesis at the University of Winnipeg with Dr. Jacques Tardif. Some of you may have known him. He's still around. He's a real titan for dendroecology in Canada, studying black spruce forests, no ticks, much better. I've also worked with Dr. Andrew Park, who some folks might know, on carbon stocks and forest diversity in jack and red pine plantations, digging lots of soil pits, which was a lot of fun. After I graduated my undergrad, I worked for a small industry player mostly related to environmental assessment. And I was kind of just using that to fund my real love, which was flexible, which was taking kids on canoe trips. But while in industry, I had a real rough time. I had a horrible boss, and I was told to do things that I honestly felt were deeply unethical. Um, I felt like science, so I worked in a few different places, but just felt like everywhere I went, science was either underused or even sometimes misused. There were some people doing great work, and I don't want to downplay that, but I was just really surprised and appalled. By what I was seeing. Oh, looks like I can see the chat. I see the Aspen Reject. Yeah, it's rough. Um, so I actually went back to academia. I worked with Dr. Cindy Stacer at Dalhousie to get a PhD. I worked on forest birds. Didn't do it because I loved academia or research. I did it because I wanted to have an impact. I wanted to see science used well to inform management and practice, and at 22, I thought the fastest way to do that would be to get a doctor in front of my name. Quite frankly, it was sort of a practical choice. Went back to research, moved to the East Coast for the first time, and I totally fell in love with the Wabanaki forest. Does anybody work in the Wabanaki forest region? So that's like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, Gaspésie, the New England states, or spent any time there? Um, Love to hear your experiences in the chat. It's magical. It's just really the diversity, the Acadian species is really magical. To survive by financially a PhD, anyone who's done a PhD knows it doesn't pay well. I kept working in consulting, mostly kind of modeling in GIS. I started teaching as a university instructor. But this was during the Harper years, which some of you may have been at NRCAN for. And during that time, I was getting contacted as a PhD student by people in NRCAN, ECCC, Parks Canada, and they were telling me these really horrifying stories about the constraints on their science, about censure from comms officers and managers, about firings, and they said they couldn't speak out. They were at risk if they could speak out, and they asked me if I could speak out for them. So that's what I did for the next half decade. I was like deeply immersed in science advocacy, helped found the group Evidence for Democracy, as well as worked for the Yellowstone Yukon Conservation Initiative. And it was pretty funny because during this time I was quite critical of government policy and practices, particularly federal government policy and practices around science and natural resources. Hilariously, I somehow got hired into government, to my surprise, to actually implement some of the policy changes I've been advocating for on the outside for the last half decade. So I came to work for NRCAN. That's actually not how I met Dr. McDonald. We met differently, but first in the Environmental Assessment Division, and then I worked for CFS for a while, predominantly with Steve Dion on knowledge exchange, who some folks probably know. So as I kind of went through all these different sectors in my career, everywhere I turned, I hit barriers. I just felt so siloed. I felt like it was so hard to reach across from academic research into industry or into government or into consulting or from the NGOs. I just felt like the knowledge to manage forests sustainably, to do ecosystem-based management that supports also communities on the long term, it was being generated, but then it wasn't being applied. It wasn't being communicated in ways that made sense for the people that needed to hear it. And the people doing the work on the ground weren't being given the chance to inform policy. So that really informed my thinking. I wanted to break down these silos. I've never really liked constraints or shackles, so I wanted to kind of take some steps to break out of them. And that led to a period of critical career growth for me, which started when I was at NRCAN working in that knowledge exchange unit. So I wanted to know, how do we get people talking to each other across sectors, across barriers, working together and doing so effectively? Well, first we had to define the problem. I'm certainly not the first person to recognize the problem. It has been, addressed in the literature. Knowledge producers and knowledge users have been kind of struggling with a well-documented science policy gap or knowledge action gap. and it has been called out in forest management specifically. So when I'm talking about knowledge producers, I'm typically talking about researchers in natural and social sciences who could be embedded in a variety of organization types. I don't just mean universities, I mean researchers in government, in indigenous organizations, in industry, in NGOs. But I also mean, sort of producers, people who hold local and indigenous knowledge, people who hold accumulated knowledge over their career. And then the users of this knowledge could be governments, whether applying it to policy or guidelines for practices, could be indigenous land stewards or rights holders, could be woodlot owners, could be industrial managers, making management plans, could be right down to operators of equipment, could also be educators, NGOs, anybody really with a role and interest in the management, conservation, restoration, forest ecosystem. So we know there's this blockage. So there's some critical research questions that need to be investigated to navigate how to move from identifying barriers to finding and implementing solutions. Those being, what even is knowledge exchange? How do forest professionals engage in knowledge exchange? And then how can we mobilize everyone's knowledge inclusively, collaboratively, and effectively to do evidence-based, sustainable forest management? I have given, I think it was a GLFCE lecture on this first one before that was kind of a whole lecture on this. So I apologize if the next 5 minutes are a little bit familiar for you, but then we'll move on to things that should be new. So I'm just going to talk about some highlights from this research. So as I mentioned, knowledge exchange happens between producers and users of knowledge, but this term talks about it being multi-directional. We broke it down into 4 types. So I developed a theoretical framework for how knowledge exchange moves in science more broadly. I would be curious to hear examples of types of these that you, if you're a knowledge producer or a researcher, that you use, and if you're receiving knowledge. So Rayvant, I'll get you to read some of the answers out to me. So one-way exchange, researcher does a study, produces it, communicates it. So produces a report or a paper and delivers it, gives a one-way presentation. Some terms I've heard are loading dock, deficit model, science communication, translation. Can folks chime in on one-way exchange that they've either kind of pushed out their information on or that they've received information from? Including if there's specific spots, whether it's journals, newsletters, where do you put your research and where do you get your research from?
Heather's asked one way is equal to lectures.
Can be, yep. Yeah, I guess this would be an example of one-way exchange. I mean, I'm hoping we'll have some discussion and I'll learn some things from you, but.
Yeah, Brian Eddy says commission reports, and Erin Fraser Reed says newsletters.
Newsletters? It's helpful, as you share to, I encourage you to be specific about whether you're sharing research or reading about research and exactly where you're getting it from, because that actually helps other people in this conversation know where people are putting things and where people are reading or hearing things from, so that they can get some ideas.
Heather said First Nations-led workshops often include multiple iterative rounds and very participatory.
Okay, that sounds like a good example of participatory exchange. So the next kind we came up with was solicited exchange. So in this case, the knowledge user invites the knowledge producer to answer a pre-identified knowledge gap. So that actually, commission reports is probably a better example of solicited exchange. So terms related to this are knowledge broker, knowledge translation, boundary spanner. For example, my lab has done some contracts for the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources. They define the question, they define what we want. We try to provide an answer for them, doing a contract with Port Hawkesbury Paper right now, Freeman Lumber, stuff like that. That's solicited exchange. Network exchange is when 2 or more actors explicitly connect for the purpose of sharing knowledge, each produced independently. So that could be workshops, conferences, professional networks. Are there any conferences professional networks or workshops that you folks find very valuable for network exchange related to forestry and forest management? Would love to hear. Like which conferences do you attend that you think are good that you would recommend people go to? Nobody likes conferences.
Erin has said CIF National Conference.
Okay. And then finally, the last is participatory exchange. So in participatory exchange, the prospective users of science are engaged and involved in generating the knowledge. So these First Nation-led workshops might be an example, but this is related to terms like co-production and co-creation. So that means that those users, those end users, whoever they might be, are right at the front door helping generate the research questions, set the direction, all the way through the process. So to answer that first question, how has knowledge exchange been defined and applied in forestry and forest sciences? Just to start with, so starting at CFS, you can see some folks here who were affiliated with CFS, like Dr. Matt Falconer, Dr. Vivian Wynn, who's at Carleton now, and we had some great RAs help us identify and capture the flow of knowledge exchange as recorded in peer-reviewed and gray literature. So we did a systematic review through using an evidence synthesis format. I won't get into the weeds of this, but it's super fun if you're like me and like definitely a bit OCD and like things in neat categories. Evidence synthesis might be a research avenue you want to explore. I find it very satisfying. But basically we searched thousands of materials, kind of whittled them down, found what was relevant, extracted data. And what we found was that publications about knowledge exchange have been increasing year over year, which is great. So a lot of the knowledge exchange doesn't get captured in literature or reports. A lot of it is happening at conferences or behind the scenes or through private conversations. But if it's not captured, you can't measure the effectiveness of it, which is really important because we want to know not just how to do knowledge exchange, but what is actually effective. So we found there's been more capture of that over the years, still not a lot though, and also more inclusion of Indigenous, local, or community knowledge over the years, but also still not a lot. We only measured up to 2020 because that's when we're extracting. 2021 was when we were capturing the information. Most of what we found was case studies and theoretical frameworks about knowledge exchange. We didn't find a lot that actually collected original data compared to the rest, like about how this worked and whether it was effective. We did find a lot of terms used for knowledge exchange. We found 90 English terms and 14 French terms. And extension was not nearly as common as we expected. As people kind of working in and around forestry, extension is probably common to you, but it's actually highly regional. So we made a recommendation that we suggest that people focus on the term knowledge exchange rather than extension because it is more universally accessible. It translates better into other languages, including French. So that was one of the big recommendations that came out of this, just to sort of simplify things. We also looked at who was producing the knowledge and who was using the knowledge. And this pie chart here shows different colors are different sectors: academia, government, industry, international organizations, local and Indigenous communities, and NGOs. And we found that every type of organization was sometimes both a producer and a user of knowledge. But overall trends were that local and Indigenous communities were very rarely a sole producer of knowledge, sometimes a user. Government was sometimes a producer of knowledge, but a very heavy user. Industry was never the sole producer of knowledge in any of the studies we found. It was always combined with, some other type of organization from another sector, but was a user of knowledge. So it's kind of interesting to think about that co-production and who is or is not being involved and what models are being used. We also track the flow internationally and regionally. So you can go have a look at our interactive map online associated with our paper and kind of see how the global north and the global south are working together. Keep in mind, we only captured information in English and French. So obviously that really limits what we're picking up. Okay, so peer-reviewed literature and reports, they're probably not capturing what's going on in the real world of forestry practice for a lot of reasons that you're familiar with. And we need more evidence of what's effective. A bit more is being collected in recent years, but there's no standard approaches and very few like rigorous approaches. So we wanted to do that, actually collect some evidence about effective KE and figure out what's going on in the real world. Some of you at various things, you might have seen some of this from my former graduate student, Samantha Chu, who led this research, did some really, really amazing work about how forest professionals engage in knowledge exchange. So we know that there are lots of barriers to knowledge exchange. You yourself may feel these. They can be individual, so like your ability as a person, and then organizational, what's made available to you by your organization. Just communications, opportunities and approaches. Time is a big one. You might not have time to go out and work with a researcher if you're a user, or vice versa. And trust between the producers and users of knowledge. So with this as a theoretical underpinning, Sam wanted to go out and see how this played out in practice among forest professionals. And she surveyed 135 registered professional foresters, RPFs, and forest technicians, or FTs, predominantly circulating it through their associations. Some of you may be part of those associations. Maybe some of you filled out that survey. And then she also interviewed 10 people to kind of dive deeper into the qualitative data. She got people across career stages, across backgrounds, across sectors. So a really nice cross section. And just some highlights that I think will be most relevant to you folks is that forest professionals engage in knowledge exchange through webinars. We're doing it right now. Reading forestry magazines and on-the-job training. But their preferences for how they wanted to engage were different. So they wanted field visits, they wanted more practical on-the-job training, and they wanted to be able to attend conferences. And there was a big preference for in-person formats, but these were often not supported due to institutional or personal barriers like time and money. Overall, Sam was able to capture the barriers to engaging in knowledge exchange, structural ones, but also research ones like academic jargon and the relevance of the academic research being conducted. Lots of folks were like, I just don't see how this research is relevant to me. You can read her thesis. It's super interesting, and there will be a paper coming out soon capturing all of this. One thing I want to bring out from this for you is about trust. So as you may know, trust in science, public trust in science is really low right now. It might be close to all-time low when you look at what's measured, general public trust in science. But that's not true in the forestry space. There's actually moderately strong trust in researchers and research. Could be a bit of a sample bias that people who are filling out a research survey maybe have a little bit more trust in researchers. And even though negative experiences did happen with forest professionals working with researchers, that trust was resilient. So one negative experience didn't turn people off on the long term, which was great. And lots of influencing factors about kind of for that trust related to perceptions of if that researcher was biased, whether they're an industry's pocket or whether they're an eco-warrior. We saw both. Personal relationships, communications, and respect, and just the institution being set up to help them succeed. Okay, last part that I'm going to cover is knowing all this now, I asked how can we kind of mobilize everyone across sectors together, bring producers and users together effectively to make actionable, effective forest research. So that led me to focus on participatory exchange as a format, particularly a format called co-production. I've got a paper on this that I'm really proud of that was a co-produced effort that was like, woof, one of the hardest things I've ever worked on, truly. Lots of very different opinions. We've got government, industry, indigenous group representatives, lawyers, people across the political spectrum. I think there was like yelling on some of these calls, but we got there in the end. And what we came to was that research, to be effective and to be just is best co-produced in equal partnership. Consent and reconciliation must be incorporated into research in what is now called Canada. We're talking predominantly with Indigenous peoples, but you also want to think about other communities that have been affected by research or forestry activity or natural resource extraction activity in the past too. And researchers really need to have thoughtful understanding to the socio-cultural context. Who are the players? And really be aware of that before embarking on research and thinking about who might be included in developing questions and developing priorities. So we came up with this framework for co-producing actionable research. I'll just briefly, I give these two-part webinars on this actually, workshops on this where I work with people who are researchers, from graduate students all the way through to like very well-established career professionals, to try to figure out these pieces together. So first you want to identify potential partners. You want to build relationships with those partners. That takes time, and you want to do that in a way that's culturally competent and have help brokering those relationships. Identify the mechanisms that your research can inform policy and management, whether that's laws, best management practices, customs, education. Plan and execute your research and communications in a co-produced way, so together with your partners. And it's intentionally circular. So the idea is that it's not just one project and then you leave this community and you leave these people. The idea is you want to maintain ongoing relationship in some way. So when it came time then for me to decide what my next big career move would be after jumping around government, consulting, not NGOs, and I got a job as a professor, I kind of thought about what's the legacy or the impact I want to leave on Canadian forestry, or what's next. And from all these lessons, I had some pretty strong ideas about how to go about it, which led to the Ecological Forestry Research Initiative. So with that, I will turn it over to Rayvant.
Thank you, Alana, for bringing us here quite literally in terms of the presentation, and obviously figuratively as well in terms of your strategy and your background and what your vision was and how FRE came to be. So I always appreciate that. So yeah, if we're going to talk about the Ecological Forestry Research Initiative a bit, but before I do that, I want to briefly talk about my career. My background was in business administration, and during this time, I actually had a project on a wind farm that I was really, really interested in, and that kind of lit a spark for me, and I decided to take the plunge and make a career in renewable energy. So for 10 years, I worked setting up wind farms in India in remote parts to provide electricity to villages that didn't have any. And yeah, so after 10 years, I knew that I was making a real world impact, but I wanted something more as well. I wanted to understand what other natural climate solutions are there that can be applied. So kind of took a break, moved to Canada and did a second master's in resource and environmental management from Dalhousie. And yeah, that was my first my first interaction with forestry, because I had no idea about that. So I had to do an internship, went into the forest, did a lot of field work, really loved it. And that is kind of what led to this job. If you're wondering why I look so proud in this picture, it's because I just climbed a 250-foot turbine. So it was very tiring, but very satisfying as well. So yeah, just a brief history of forestry in Nova Scotia. So since after colonization, forests in Nova Scotia were managed initially for firewood, timber, and ship mass. In the 1930s, with the mechanization of saws, harvesters, and other equipment, clear cutting became the dominant method of cutting. However, particularly in Nova Scotia, where we mostly have thin mineral soils, this wasn't an ecologically appropriate method of harvest of most of the forest types in the region. So this resulted in a degradation of the forest and a transition of the forest towards more softwood boreal species, or if you would like to call it borealization of the forest. So prompted by the ecological concerns as well as the mill closures, there was a demand and a review was written in 2018, basically saying that we are at a crossroads. If we don't do anything and change our practices, this might lead to an emergency. So where the changes might be irreversible. So the review was published, but it still took about 4 years of time for ecological forestry to be implemented, and it was finally implemented in Nova Scotia on Crown land in 2022. And this was the first time we were practicing this in the province, so we had no idea what the impact of that would be, which is what led to the formation of EFRI. And if we move on, so the model that was implemented for ecological forestry on Crown land is the triad model. So ecological forestry is not a new idea, and it has been used in other jurisdictions. So the idea is to take a land base and divide it into zones. And the model, like I said, in Nova Scotia, is the triad model. So about 55% of the land has been classified as ecological matrix, wherein there's a guide that is published called the Silvicultural Guide to the Ecological Matrix, and you have to go into a stand and classify that stand and apply the prescription based on that. 35% has been marked for conservation and 10% for high production areas where clear cutting may or may not be allowed, depending on what type of stand it is. And then if we move on, yeah. So a bit of background. The Ecological Forestry Research Initiative is a Dalhousie University-based collaboration between researchers, nonprofit organizations, MICMA organizations, government personnel, and industry stakeholders, with a mandate to produce and disseminate research on ecological forestry practices and sustainable forestry more generally within the Wabanaki forest. We include members and participants mostly from the Maritimes, but also experts across Canada and at multiple levels of the government. So some of the guiding questions that we had that shaped EFRI's work are like, we are committed that all of our work is not just about research and peer-reviewed publications. We develop knowledge mobilization plans for our projects, and that includes trade magazines, public media, direct outreach to relevant associations. We put a lot of thought into designing for impact. So our research outreach and knowledge mobilization is guided by the main questions, which are what silvicultural techniques best mimic natural disturbance? How does the transition to ecological forestry impact Nova Scotia's biodiversity, economy, road network, and recreational use? How can we encourage adoption of ecological forestry on private lands? And then how can we do forest research that is more inclusive, equitable, and effective at improving policy and practice? So some of the guiding principles that guide our work are, we feel what makes EFRI different from other such initiatives are we co-develop a values and agreements document among the partnership and periodically revisit them. So some of the core values include respect and integrity and diversity and accessibility. So these are likely well understood by all of you, and they underpin everything that we try to do. With regard to how we do work, we embrace co-production. This means that practitioners, public, and end users of research are involved in planning and guiding the work and knowledge exchange. We also ensure actionable research, meaning that our work provides clear, practical insights that directly guide real-world decisions and measurable steps. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of our projects now, and based on what are some of the questions that I'd mentioned earlier, we basically divided EFRI into 4 clusters, and the 4 clusters kind of cover these all these realms that I mentioned here. So that is knowledge exchange, forest management, carbon dynamics, forest biodiversity, landowner values, and systematic reviews. So in the chat quickly, is anybody here working on any of these? And Alana, if you want to read them out, if somebody says something.
Nothing yet. But yeah, I'll keep an eye on it. Folks do chime in.
Sure. So then, so the first cluster of EFRI is the Forest Biodiversity and Management cluster. So while ecological forestry may have ecological benefits like enhancing and mitigating risk to biodiversity, uh, it also requires more frequent silviculture and harvesting interventions than clear cutting. So research was required to predict if uneven edge management will increase the footprint and frequency of the use of the forestry road network, and if these increases will impact ecological connectivity, particularly for species at risk like the wood turtle. And yeah, this could also result in or contribute to the spread of invasive species and impact recreation. So we have a number of projects on the go, and I'll be talking about a few of them ahead. So yeah, the first project is a PhD project that is kind of trying to understand the impact of historical harvesting techniques on stream temperature and particularly Atlantic salmon habitat. So Ben's thesis focuses on understanding the drivers of thermal regimes in salmon rivers. So he's using a modeling to tease apart how much variation in stream thermal regimes can be explained by biophysical on-the-ground variables like catchment area, slope, forest cover versus interannual patterns like weather. And the second project is barriers to fish habitat on forestry roads. So this is actually an honors project, and this is the third student that's taking it forward. So the first project was started in 2024, I believe, by Rosie. Uh, uh, and yeah, it was trying to understand if culverts that are built on forestry roads are suitable for fish habitat. So the map that you can see here informs the assessment of current connectivity conditions, which can then be compared with future culvert remediation scenarios. So very quickly, the red dots you see, they were complete barriers, and I think you can see a lot of them there. The orange ones are partial barriers, and the green ones are the passable culverts. So what Rebecca is doing is creating a species distribution model for the Atlantic salmon in Nabusanac or the St. Mary's River. And yeah, I mean, the research is still ongoing, and we should be expecting results soon. So if we move on. So with ecological forestry and selective harvesting techniques, there is a concern that leaving interior trees might make them susceptible to wind throw. So preliminary results of this project show that after 5 years, red spruce trees on the edges of openings are no more vulnerable to wind than interior trees. So this is really good news for alleviating fears that landowners may have about shelter wood or other forms of partial cutting, as they might fear that remaining trees will be lost to wind throw. And I've put some pictures of the project and the field work here. One really interesting thing that I saw was the student was actually pulling down red spruce trees to kind of test their strength. And the internal trees mostly were uprooted, but the trees on the edge of the forest snapped after some time. So that was really interesting to see that difference there. The next project is about the effectiveness of tree marking. And so tree marking is legally required in some jurisdictions, although not here. And there are discussions that probably it could be used here. However, there are concerns that it could increase the costs for operators, but also hopes that it could improve compliance and long-term stand productivity. So by studying this and sharing information, organizations representing woodlot owners can provide their members with evidence-informed recommendations about whether or not to hire contractors who use tree marking, and if they may get a long-term value for short-term extra costs. So some of the indicators that are used for this project are ecological, in terms of cavity trees, mass trees, and species diversity, operational in terms of productive machine hours, trail abundance percentage, and financial analysis like cost by revenue, and also stand improvement like residual tree quality, vigor, logging damage, etc. So at this point, the data completion is done, and or the data collection is done, and the harvest operations have been carried out, and the analysis is currently going on. So the area on this map is highlighted in yellow, shows the blowdown impact from Hurricane Fiona that happened a couple of years ago. So salvage harvesting is becoming predominant, and we know that uh, you know this is usually done in response to fires or hurricanes, right? Which are, well, hurricanes are always common here, but fires have become more common over the last 4 or 5 years. So preliminary results are showing that 100% salvage harvests have negative impacts on biodiversity and may increase forest fire risk. So once this work is completed, we will be able to provide information on woodlot owners about whether and how to partially salvage to protect biodiversity and protect against fire risk on their lands. And we have Lisa Doucet, who's from the Department of Natural Resources, who's co-supervising this along with Dr. Lana Westwood. The second cluster under FRE is carbon valuation and understanding the carbon dynamics in woodlands and how this can be measured. So some of the current research that is going on here are trying to answer questions like what are the effects of ecological silviculture on forest stand carbon stocks and stock change over time, and what are some of the ways that carbon can potentially be measured in a forest stand. So we have a student at UNB who's doing research on forest carbon dynamics and using a chronosequence sampling structure. So preliminary results are showing that carbon pools accumulate in uneven-aged harvesting sites over time, whereas there is a boom and bust cycle with clear cutting. So although plantations accumulate huge amounts of carbon, they store most of their carbon in live trees, which means that when final harvest occurs, the system is highly depleted, especially considering the instability of the forest floor following intensive harvesting. So in contrast, under single tree selection, carbon storage is more evenly distributed in soil, dead woody debris, and other pools. These accumulate over time, even after thinning treatments. As a result, single tree selection sites sustain higher total carbon stocks across all age classes, while still providing ongoing opportunities for timber harvest. So in this graph, you can see during, like, just after clear cutting, the carbon stocks have completely depleted, whereas with the selective harvesting approach, they gradually increase over time. The third cluster under the Ecological Forestry Research Initiative is a knowledge exchange cluster, and this is predominantly used for testing effective communication for ecological forestry research on science in real decision context. The project also, Alana spoke about Sam's project about how foresters prefer knowledge exchange to occur. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. If we move on to the next slide. Yeah. So I mentioned that ecological forestry was implemented only on Crown land, but the unique feature about Nova Scotia is that Crown land is only 30% of the land in the province, and 70% of it is privately owned. So I mentioned the Leahy report earlier, but there's a really interesting line mentioned in there that ecological forestry cannot really be fully effective without implementing it on private land. So to encourage woodlot owners and other landowners to adopt ecological forestry on their privately held lands, it is critical to understand the landowners' barriers to adopting ecological forestry and design solutions to engage them in ways they are responsive to. So we have just recruited a PhD student who will be carrying out this research. And we are also leading a couple of systematic reviews. The first one is a systematic map of forest zoning in Canada and beyond. So we are gathering data on forest zoning from around the world. And we'll also be conducting a systematic literature review of ecological forestry in the Wabanaki Forest region. So for the first one, we're going to try and review the application of the triad and other forest zonation models worldwide to help give industry and government clarity on what long-term outcomes might look like in Nova Scotia. And for the second one, we haven't started this work yet. We'll be doing, Alana and I will be doing it next year. This is going to be on ecological forestry in the Wabanaki Forest region, including Canada and the New England states. So the results will be used to populate a knowledge exchange portal on our website with information targeted at woodlot owners, organizations, industry, and researchers in a variety of formats to provide easy access to information on best practices for ecological forestry. Yeah, as a part of EFRI, we have quite different knowledge exchange products. We have 3 knowledge exchange sessions that we host every year, where we have experts in their field come and share their information and talk about the work that they're doing. We also have about 3 newsletters that we try to publish every year. All of these are available on our website, which I'm excited to say was launched in November last year. So all the information about all the work we are doing is available there. There's a QR code here that you can use to visit the website and also become a part of the mailing list to subscribe to the Ken sessions and newsletters. And if anybody is here who actually wants to take part in the Ken session as a speaker, please reach out to us. And don't forget to sign it. And the last cluster under EFRI is supporting Mi'kmaq-led forestry initiatives. With this, we've kind of just taken a step back and only provide funding support and provide the organizations autonomy on how they want to set their objectives and what their targets are. And yeah, so we worked with Eskasoni Fish and Wildlife Commission in identifying Mi'kmaq values for forestry. And we're also providing some funding support to Namaki Institute of Natural Resources to share their biocultural and connectivity forest stewardship initiatives. So this is the current core team here. As you can see, it's a great amalgamation of academics, government folks, and students. So I always kind of like this. And yeah, and what I really appreciate about our structure is that, there's no hierarchical structure here. It's a circle. Everybody is treated equally and has an equal say in everything. And finally, we wouldn't be able to do any of this without our funders. So the bulk of our funding was received by the Forestry Innovation Transition Trust and Research Nova Scotia. And yeah, we also have received some funding from SHRC, DAL, Eco-Canada, and a few industry folks as well. And yeah, with that, thank you for listening. And yeah, like I said, use the QR code to learn more about us. Or yeah, there's an email address here, efri@dal.ca. So reach out to us. Thank you.